It's the best course of action, and it's often a lot of people who are independent filmmakers and entrepreneurs think that they can do everything on their own because they have a lot of common sense and they're writers, for example, or they have friends who've done this and they'll just use contracts they've gotten from friends. That's
Mm.
a really big pitfall because there's so much in the law that is not regular everyday stuff.
Hi, and welcome back to StudioBinder Academy. I'm Brandon. Today we're speaking with attorney Melissa Dagodag, who practices in various areas of law, including entertainment. Melissa, thank you for being here today. And I hope I said your name right.
You did. Thank you so
All
much, and
right.
thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, welcome. And to get started, we like to get everyone's backstory. So, how did you get into law and specifically entertainment law?
I can tell you, I used to be a fashion model with Elite Model Management before I became an attorney
Wow.
and traveled the world, but I also met a lot of creative, fun, interesting, talented people. And I happen to be a creative. I write music and poetry. And the reason I got interested in the law is because I'm so creative and created so much intellectual property that I wanted to
Mm.
protect. And then I had so many friends who were like writers and painters and actors. And I thought, I could go to law school and learn how to protect my creative works and also help my
Mm.
friends and protect their creative works. So that's what motivated me to go to law school.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I didn't know that about you being a fashion model. That's amazing. Now,
It
as far as
helps.
your
It helps. I'll tell you why it helps. It helps because I have a background being in front of the camera. And so with a lot of
Mhm.
my clients, they really appreciate that I have walked a mile in their shoes and it makes a difference in terms of being able to relate to my clients.
That's absolutely amazing. Now, as far as your career path, what did your career path look like? I know you said you were a fashion model, but was there anything else in between that before you went into law school?
Yeah, so I got my BA and MA in English at Stanford University. And
Okay.
while I was an undergrad, I started my own product design and manufacturing company. And we made
Mm.
candles, clocks, and home accessories and sold them to various stores out there like busy galleries and stores like that for young people. And I did that before I became an attorney and actually wrote a patent successfully before I became an attorney for
Wow.
a clock that I invented.
Wow. So you were very accomplished.
I was busy. I was doing a lot of things.
I would
Lots
imagine.
of irons in the fire.
Now, could you briefly just summarize what specifically you do?
So, in terms of filmmakers, I handle production contracts for independent films and I form the business entity that usually owns the film and enters into all the contracts on behalf of the filmmaker. So,
Oh.
that and registering trademarks, brand names, are huge parts of what I do. I also register copyrights once the film is in the can, and I can register the copyright for it as an audiovisual work. And for screenplays, of course, I also register the scripts with, the copyright office. And other than that, I handle a lot of work from various creative types, whether they're
Mm.
influencers or inventors or, interior designers. I work with a lot of creative people across the board.
Now, as far as your role within the production, what does that look like from pre-production through post-production?
So typically, I'm really heavily involved in pre-production because I want to get all the contracts with the above the line, below the line
Mm.
people signed before the production actually begins. So that's my real heavy involvement stage. And usually, when the film is actually in production, I don't have a
Mm.
lot of involvement unless there's something like, God forbid, and this did happen once, like an actor becomes deceased while they're
Oh.
filming or there's a location issue or something like that. Usually, I'm not really hands on during the actual production phase. And
Okay.
many times, the person who is more hands on will be like an executive producer who is working on the film. And sometimes they can be lawyers who act as executive producers, and they will handle issues that might come up for the production while it's in production. And then in post
Okay.
production, I just step in terms of helping to get the film distributed. And so I'll review and negotiate all of those agreements like the distribution contract.
What does that process usually look like when it comes to distribution?
The distribution process, like my clients, since I work on my own, I've been practicing for over 20 years. I started my career at a big firm where we represented bigger clients, but I represent on my own a lot of smaller clients and really independent filmmakers. So the distribution process from my end usually looks like the client has gone to different festivals like AFMA or the Marché du Film at Cannes or MIP or MIPCOM, and they've gone to festivals and they've had distribution companies reach out to them and say, hey, yeah, we're interested in distributing this in Europe or wherever. And they send them a contract. So on my end, there's not a huge amount of effort until I step in and read that contract and make sure that it's in keeping with industry standards. On my client's end, they do a lot of work and travel a lot to try to get their film to market. The other place, of course, that they try to get their films to market are at film festivals. So lots of my
Mhm.
clients get their films in independent film festivals with the hopes of getting a distributor interested.
What can a lawyer do to help the success of a distribution of a film?
One of the things that you can help uh, do before you try to distribute your film is make sure that all of your contracts are in order. And that's what I'm here for. But the reason that's so important is nobody will want to distribute your film unless you have all the rights that you say you have to it. And the
Mm.
way to prove that you have those rights is to be able to pass what's called a chain of title so that they can see, oh, we formed this production entity XYZ LLC. All of the contracts with everyone involved in the film are with that same LLC, and the copyrights registered in the name of that LLC, and so on and so forth. And they just want to make sure that everything points back to you owning the rights that you say you do, so that the distribution company doesn't have to worry that they're going to get sued because you don't have the rights that you promised that you did.
Okay, that makes sense. As far as the process of, distribution for an entertainment lawyer, is there a major difference between a big budget studio film and an indie production?
Yes, I mean, there definitely is with the big budget films that I don't handle.
Mm.
Usually that's all worked out from the get-go, that there
Okay.
is called a pre-sale and that license is entered into before the completion of the film. And so all of that distribution is worked out, once that film has gone into production or at the very latest, once production is completed and it's in the can. So with my clients, they often will not have any distributor interested until they take it to the festivals or they go to these different
Mm.
film markets and they make sales of the film. And of course, that's a huge difference because you don't have that distribution to rely upon.
Now, you mentioned LLCs. Why are those so important?
So, having a separate entity is important for many reasons. First and foremost, if you want to have people invest in your film, it's a really good investment vehicle to have a limited liability company, an LLC. You will want a film finance specialist, which I don't handle, to make
Mm.
sure that if you need something called a PPM, which is a private placement memorandum, and that's because whenever you take investment into a film, there may be certain securities laws triggered that make it so you're required to have this document called a PPM, where you really want a film finance law specialist to handle it.
Mm.
And the reason that you might want that LLC, like I said, is it is easier to take investments from people who are going to give you money that they want to usually be repaid on a certain schedule if you have that PPM in place. And the thing that a lot of people don't know, and I try to mention this up front to my independent filmmakers, is that there are possible criminal penalties if you're required legally to have this private placement memorandum and you don't have it in place. So many people think that they can just have a pitch deck and have this slick deck that they're pitching their film to and they can just get investment from that. And it's not necessarily true. You might have to make certain disclosures in this PPM that an attorney drafts for you in order not to violate the law. So it's really a really big important step not to overlook.
All right. Would you say the best course of action for anyone, a filmmaker beginning the process, is to contact an entertainment lawyer?
It's the best course of action, and it's often a lot of people who are independent filmmakers and entrepreneurs think that they can do everything on their own because they have a lot of common sense and they're writers, for example, or they have friends who've done this and they'll just use contracts they've gotten from friends.
Mm,
That's a really big pitfall because there's so much in the law that is not regular everyday stuff.
mm,
Language, the way things are dealt with in terms of rights. And so you really just want to make sure that you hire an attorney. And I know for some people that's daunting, and a lot of people think of attorneys like, the litigators they see on TV and shows like Law and Order, and they're like, I don't need to do that. I'm not fighting anyone. I'm like, no, 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 we're here. We're here to prevent problems for you. So I always tell people transactional attorneys, ones who handle contracts and copyright registration, trademark registration, we are here to deal in preventative medicine for the law. And so we're trying to prevent problems for you. We're trying to prevent that scenario where you get a distributor interested and then they find out, oh no, all of your contracts don't have the same entity listed as the owner. You've got to go back and straighten that out. Or worse, you have music in your independent film that you haven't cleared properly and you don't have the right licenses to it. So you have an attorney who works with you, and we're going to see that all the contracts are in the right name and it's consistent with the
mm.
entity, the same entity owning all the rights. And we'll make sure that you've cleared your music. You don't have the Rolling Stones, satisfaction playing in your lovely film that you can't possibly afford to get a license for. We're going to make sure that everything, is I's dotted, T's crossed, and that you can get that film distributed. And that's why you want to call an attorney, not because, we're bad people. We like to argue, but because we're going to help prevent problems for you.
Yeah, I go back to, the collaboration process, and I feel like, the entertainment lawyers is a collaborator in the process. They know more than I do personally. So yeah, I'm definitely going to talk to them to get their opinion, make sure everything is, even keel. So
That's
yeah,
right.
it does
That's right. We're
does
here to
sound like
help.
a
We're here to help, believe it or not.
Now, in distribution, what does the licensing process look like, and who's typically involved?
This is a question, I have a very narrow view of this because I don't deal with bigger films. So there could be, a lease agreement or a profit sharing distribution
Mm,
contract. Mostly what I see on my end that I deal with is sales agents. So my independent filmmaker client will produce a film and then they will meet a sales agent that will shop their film to try to find a distributor. So that's kind of the
mm,
intermediary step that I see. And that sales agent will take a percentage of whatever license agreement they get with their distributor for the film. So that's what
okay.
I see. I don't see a lot of these other types of agreements that are different for bigger
Mm.
budget films. And, perhaps that's not the most information that you wanted, but
No, that's okay.
I have a limited window because I'm dealing with independent films. A lot of my filmmakers, fall into the low budget,
Mhm.
and they use the low budget category for agreements with SAG and so on.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Now, could you describe the difference between leasing and profit sharing distribution contracts?
A leasing agreement uh, is for circumstances in which the distributor is distributing the film, usually on a reduced fee basis, and then the
Mm,
production company will pay for distribution expenses like prints of the film and advertising. And what's key is to limit the distribution fee, um, the deductions that can be taken out of that. So what happens is you might have a fee that you're going to be paid, but there are a lot of deductions. And this is just like the age old definition of net profits, where people, can say that they're paying you net profits, but will there be any net profits in the end? So what's key in that type of distribution agreement is you want to make sure that you limit what can be um, counted as expenses. And if you don't
okay.
limit that, there could be very little left for the filmmaker to be able to take. And in contrast, what happens with the profit sharing contracts, that also is going to be a percentage of something, and it all
Mhm.
matters how it's defined. So I think a lot of people, especially people who aren't lawyers, get caught up in what something is called. Like, am I getting gross profits? Am I getting net profits? What really matters always in a contract is how something is defined. So it really doesn't matter what you call it. Defined terms and contracts will be in capitalized letters. And for example, like gross profits or net profits, they're going to be defined terms in an agreement. And what always matters is, what are the details of that definition? Like, what expenses
Mhm.
does this person get to take out before they pay me? And how do I limit those expenses so I get more money? That's what's crucial.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned the chain of title. Could you
Mhm.
elaborate on what exactly that means for filmmakers?
The chain of title is really the way that you prove that you own all of the rights that you're representing and warranting that you do own in and to the film. And so that comes down to, like I said, contracts with all the talent, all the above the line, below the line
Mhm.
people in your film, making sure that those rights track completely with the contracts that you have. And all the licenses, for example, a master use and a sync license to use sound recording of a certain musical composition in your film. You want to make sure that
Mhm.
those licenses are covered and they're for your particular film owned by your particular entity. All of that. Usually, I started my career when I worked at Fox in the music legal department when I was in law school at UCLA School of Law. And we used to have an actual hard copy binder of all of our contracts. So we knew that
Wow.
every agreement that we needed for a certain film was in this binder. And that's really, or many binders for a single film, of course. But you really want to make sure that it comes down to that. All of those contracts in the correct name of your entity and all of the rights track back to the entity that you're representing and warranting as a filmmaker you own. So for example, when you enter into a distribution contract, going to be a representations and warranty provision in it that says that you own all the rights that you're saying you do, and that this distributor is not going to get sued if they go distribute this film overseas for you. And if they do, there's usually something called an indemnification provision that says you'll stand behind them if they get sued for something that is due to the fact that you misrepresented your ownership rights or anything else you may have misrepresented in the contract.
Yeah, forewarning to any filmmakers out there, make sure you have the rights.
Yes, and it seems obvious, but it's sometimes things that people don't think about. Like I said, with the
Mhm.
music, it can be very confusing to people that there are 2 separate licenses that are required. A master use license so that you can use a sound recording that's owned often by a record label, and then a
Mhm.
sync license so that you can put that musical composition in synchronization with a moving picture. So those often for well-known recording artists, that's one company that owns both, but sometimes you
Mhm.
work with, a singer-songwriter, and it might not be the same person that will own all those rights. So it really is something where you want a lawyer to look into this and draft the right agreements with the right parties so that you don't get yourself into hot water later.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, and like you said earlier, independent filmmakers are not always thinking about these things. From my own experience, I'm learning a lot today, so thank you. But yeah, it's stuff you don't think about because you're busy being creative, trying to make the best project as possible. But some of those aspects might require an entertainment lawyer to look over everything, make sure it's good to go.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you're busy being creative. You're busy, booking the location,
Hmm.
making sure you have the permit, making sure that the talent's gonna, is awake, getting someone to bring them on set.
Now, how do copyright searches work?
So there is a whole area of the law called copyright clearance. And
Mhm.
typically it's something that you would pay. There are clearance companies that you can pay to do that work for you because at bigger and mid-sized law firms, they usually have paralegals who handle that. So people often
Mm.
call me and ask me if I do that kind of work. I don't handle copyright clearance work. It's not usually worth it to pay for the time of an attorney to handle a copyright
Mhm.
clearance. So you usually want to use paralegals or a copyright clearance company. And what that work involves is uh, reviewing the screenplay and reviewing the film to make sure that there's nothing in it that could trigger a copyright infringement lawsuit. So, what could
Mm.
that be? Strangely enough, I'll give you an example. It could be like you have a building a work of an architectural work that's subject to copyright protection that appears in your film. A lot of
Oh.
people don't realize that buildings like the Disney concert hall can be subject to copyright protection. So it's anything that could trigger a copyright infringement lawsuit. And moreover, there's trademark issues that could trigger infringement lawsuits as well. And that could be like, oh, you have the brand name of a store appearing in the background in a scene at a mall, and that could be something where, oh, you have to get a license to have that name appearing. So there's lots of intellectual property issues that need to be spotted and dealt with to secure the proper licenses, either for copyrights or for trademarks.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't know that, the architecture of a building could come under copyright. That's very
Yes,
interesting.
yes.
Now, what is errors and omissions insurance and why is it necessary?
So errors and emissions insurance is a very specific type of film insurance that you can obtain from insurance carriers. I, of course, am not an insurance person, so I refer that out. It's really important because basically anyone who's going to distribute your film wants to know that they're covered in case there's something that went wrong.
Mm,
Where again, coming back to you represented and warranted that you owned certain rights that you didn't warrant, and it's important for liability reasons because people want to be named in those errors and emissions insurance policies. For example, when I work on agreements for writers for a film, they usually want to be named parties on that insurance. So the details of your insurance are really significant. I can't speak at length about the details because I'm not an insurance agent or carrier, but I do know that you want to hire someone who's really experienced in entertainment errors and
mm,
emissions insurance because that is something highly specific. Um, and I believe, in addition, that will cover things like if an actor has any kind of takes any kind of action where that actor might come into ill repute while on location working on your film, your insurance can, if you have the right type of insurance, can really help you in that kind of situation where you might have to terminate the services of an actor according to a clause in your agreement for doing something like, in social media, so making a statement that made that person look bad and you no longer wanting to have that actor work on your film.
Now, what are your next steps after a film's distribution rights have been obtained?
After the rights have been obtained, I mean, basically, the independent filmmaker always has those rights. They are going to keep those rights because, like I said in my example, and the
Mhm.
filmmakers I work with, I form an entity for them, usually an LLC that will own the rights to the film. And all of that chain of title matches up. They have all the contracts and the name of that LLC that I formed, and the copyright for the screenplay, and the copyright for the audiovisual recording is also in the name of that company. So that independent filmmaker will own and control the rights to the film and they can distribute however they see fit. Oftentimes, what will happen is the owners of that LLC are 51% or more, the actual filmmaker, and then maybe they'll have 49% investors. But that's not an issue because what will happen is that the majority is owned by that actual filmmaker. So they get to make the decisions for the entity. And if they
Mm.
decide, hey, this based on our attorney's advice, this is a great distribution deal, we're going to enter into that agreement, they can do that because they own and control the majority interest in that entity, that LLC, and they can do so freely and sign that distribution agreement.
What advice could you give a filmmaker who's looking to obtain distribution?
Going back to my advice about hiring an attorney, what I would say is make sure that you've had an attorney at least. If you didn't have the attorney from the get go, at least go over your contracts and make sure that they are all reflecting proper ownership of the film and all the contracts are in the
Mm.
name of any entity that was created for you and that you have all the music rights. Because if you don't have that all together, no distributor is going to be interested in you. And basically, if you can picture it, even if you don't print things, I mean, I store things electronically these days, but if you can picture, like, I have one folder on my desktop that has all my contracts that are signed and all of the
Mm.
licenses for the music, it's all in that folder, and then you'll be able to forward that to a distributor. That's what you want to have, ideally, so that everyone can see that this is a good deal for them to proceed with because there isn't going to be a dispute about the rights.
Now, what are some common mistakes that you see projects make as far as regarding distribution?
I would say that I see people signing longer term agreements with sales agents, like I told you, who are people who shop your film around to try to get it
Mhm.
distributed. And you really don't want to be locked into something long term if they're not producing any results for you. So that's a mistake
Okay.
because what would happen, like if you sign a 3-year agreement, they have 3 years to shop it around. And then by then, whatever topic your film was on might be sort of passe and nobody will be interested. So you kind of want this
Mm.
person, the sales agent to maybe shop it around for a year or 18 months at the most and try to get you a deal, but you don't want to enter into a longer term agreement. So I've come across clients who want to terminate distribution agreements, and usually in many of the ones they've signed before I was working with them, they don't have an agreement provision so that they can terminate that agreement. And they're kind of stuck with someone who's kind of sitting around twiddling their thumbs and not doing much for them.
Say I were in that situation, is that something that you would be able to help me get out of or, kind of work it with?
It really depends. I mean, a lot of people call for various kinds of contracts and they want to terminate. I mean, if there isn't that termination language in there, sometimes you can terminate if people have failed to live up to their end of the bargain and you can allege a breach of
Mm.
contract, but that's not so clean and neat. So, what it often comes down to is that the sales agent will say, fine, you can terminate, but I need you to pay me a flat fee of $10,000 or something like that just to be able to get out of that contract.
All right. So it sounds like it's a good idea to, make sure that your contracts are, shorter in length, as you said, 18 months at most.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You want a shorter agreement with the sales agent. That's what I'm saying. So that they, have a short period of time to shop it around and get you a deal, but a reasonable period of time. And you also want to make sure that termination provisions are in the agreement in case, it's just spelled out in case that they're not finding anyone for you after a certain length of time. You can terminate earlier if you wanted to.
How can a filmmaker make your job easier?
This is a huge issue. And I would say this across the board. How can any client make my job easier? Stop having handshake deals, okay? Don't just have a handshake and think, well, verbal agreements are binding. This is great. I can't tell you how many people get into problems because they have a handshake deal. It's like, oh, my best friend's roommate is a cinematographer, so I just decided I was going to have him shoot for the day. And he's really great, so it's not going to be a problem. And down the road, guess what? It's a problem.
Mm.
So just having these handshake deals, even though you want to be friendly and you don't want to look like the bad guy, the nerdy guy, or the, whatever guy, having a handshake deal is not as good as having something in writing so that you can rely on. And I generally advise my clients uh, that to say and to kind of pitch it this way is like having agreements in writing is better for everyone because it's clear. And then in the remote possibility that we will have a dispute, we have a clear document that lets us all know what's right. What did we agree on? And that's how I think it should be pitched is sort of, you want an agreement in place. And this is not me trying to like force this agreement down your throat. It's me offering this agreement so that we all can be on the same page and we don't have problems.
Now, to wrap up, do you have any advice for anyone looking to get into law, specifically within the film industry?
I alluded to the fact that I interned at what used to be 20th Century Fox. So at Fox,
Mhm.
and I was in the music legal department the whole time I was in law school. I worked 20 hours a week. And that really helped me because, first of all, a lot of the studio attorneys do not have a huge workload, at least when I was there. So they had a lot of spare time to train me and teach me. And that was part of what they enjoyed doing because I was their intern. So they gave me, most of what I know about being a good attorney. I learned from being an intern at Fox. And in fact, my mentor to this day, I still consult him about things. Was the senior executive VP of my department at that time. And so, if you can get a job where you're an intern at a studio, that's great because a lot of times those attorneys will have time to teach you, and that's not necessarily true if you go to a law firm. So that's one bit of advice. And then another bit of advice is before you even go to law school, this is not something I did, but many people have told me this worked for them. You can get a job potentially as a paralegal or an administrative assistant, something like that, at a law firm to kind of get your toes wet and see what it's like to work at a law firm, to see if that lifestyle is for you, if you like that kind of work, if the atmosphere, the vibes you get from that work atmosphere really work for you. Those would be two things that I would highly recommend.
Well, excellent, excellent. Well, Melissa, we made it to the end. Those are all the questions we have for you. Thank you so much. This is an area that, like you said, a lot of filmmakers don't know, and so I think this information will be very informative to a lot of people. So, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. You have a great one.
You too.
If you're looking for legal advice, be sure to check the links in the description to find Melissa's website and socials. And if you're looking for more interviews or deep dives into the StudioBinder software, be sure to like and subscribe to be notified when new videos are added. I'm Brandon with StudioBinder Academy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.